Okay, folks, in this video we're going to be talking a little bit about earnest money. Earnest money is a pretty simple concept, but it's really important to understand how it acts for both buyers and sellers. So, earnest money is really important to the contract. It's typically early in the contract. Here in Texas, it's on our first page. Right after we've committed to the price that's going to be paid for the home, we're committing to the earnest money that's going to be put up. So, earnest money is typically about 1% of the purchase price. So on a $150,000 home, earnest money would be about $1,500. On a $500,000 home, earnest money would be about $5,000. Now, earnest money is the amount of money that a buyer puts up to let a seller know that they're serious about going forward with the transaction. It's kind of a conditional deposit. It can be refunded to the buyer under certain circumstances, and it can be defaulted to the seller under certain circumstances. So that money is going to go to either an attorney or a title company and be held as a neutral third party that's going to use that money based on the way the contract's set out. So for example, if a buyer were to find out during an inspection or option period that the home didn't meet their standards based on some major repairs that were needed or something along those lines, they would have the ability to back out of the contract and be refunded the full amount of their earnest money. Now, if they were to pass through that inspection or option period and then just change their mind for whatever reason and say, hey, we want out of the deal, but that wasn't pre-negotiated in the contract, at that point they would then default that earnest money to the seller, and that would be the seller's compensation for having held the home off the market on behalf of that buyer for a while. So that money gets held by a neutral third party and then moved to whichever party it belongs to based on what's in the contract. Now, as long as everything goes forward and the deal works and the buyer buys and the seller sells, that money then will apply to the buyer's costs at closing. So if they've put $5,000 down and they're supposed to bring $12,000 to closing, they'll only need to bring another $7,000 because that $5,000 that's already there as earnest money will apply to their total closing costs. So earnest money is the amount of money that the buyer puts up to let the seller know they're serious, and the amount of money that the seller knows if things go wrong that they'll be compensated with. So it's a pretty simple part of the contract. Like I said, typically about 1% of the purchase price, and it operates based on what the contract says when the money would go to who. But in a good normal transaction, it'll apply to the buyer's closing costs, and everybody's happy.